Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining Photoshop Made Easy. This is the second installment into this Photoshop series. So we're talking about blend modes and opacities and layers. So we're going to do some teeth whitening, some skin retouching, some banding issues, and some moire as well. Also, a couple other things. So if there is anything that you would like me to go over, please put that into the chat. And thanks again for joining McKenna. We are a professional photo lab that's been around for 55 years, over 55 years. And so welcome to our webinar. Let's start with some teeth whitening. So last time we met, we talked about our workspaces and stuff like that. So when we get into layers, for those of you who are more familiar with Lightroom and stuff like that, obviously Photoshop is a lot different in that you have a hierarchy of layers. So this is just an Adobe stock image that came like this. What they actually did in order to create this is they just duplicated one side and then changed the teeth. You can see that by the reflections. They're exactly identical on each side, right? And teeth aren't like that. You're going to have different lights on each side, but you can see that in the sort of these reflections. Okay, so how do we whiten teeth, right? Okay, so I just went ahead. This is what I did here. And I'll show you how I did that. Okay, and I have a mask on this. Okay, so I'm just going to recreate this, and you can see this is a curve, and I changed all of these channels. So if I go to my properties of my curves, then I can change each channel like this. Okay, so one good thing to know is the color wheel. So let me just pull up the color wheel, and this is what this is here, right? You can see this. Cyan is the opposite of red, magenta is the opposite of green, and yellow is the opposite of blue. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we change these channels in here. Okay, red, green, blue. You can also change the magenta, cyan, and yellow. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of our color balance because we don't need that. And we're going to recreate this. Okay, now, all right, so let's say we're going to go into our marquee tool. So I'll use some shortcuts. This is the M tool. So I can just draw a little box around here and then I'll fix my mask. So let's recreate this. Okay, so this little button here, I call this my holy grail button. This is probably my favorite button in here. This is the adjustment layer to create a new adjustment layer. Okay, so I'm just going to create a curves layer and I'm going to put it into the blend mode color. So it only affects the color. Okay, you can see that nothing changed because I haven't changed anything yet. Okay, so this is the mask. And if you push the backslash key, that was the rectangle that I drew. And nothing's being affected, so you won't see any changes. This is how you get to the properties. Okay, and they are linked. You can unlink them, and I'll show you why a little later of why you want to do that. All right, so what's happening? You can see, let's start with yellow. You can see that these teeth are a little yellow. So if you increase blue, let's see, then let me just not mess that up. Let's do blue. Okay, so increase blue. And all right. And then you can see how the magenta, let's go to green. And then you can, that looks better. And now maybe red, let's see what red does. And then maybe something like that. Okay, so there's just a little shift in that. Now we have to repaint our mask. Okay, so on the mask, what is black is not showing, not being affected, and what is in the white is being affected. by this certain layer adjustment, okay? So just know that the red, and I just hit the backslash key to do that, what is in red is what is black, what is not showing, and what is not red in on the layer on the mask itself is white. That's what is being shown. Okay, so as I paint with the eraser, okay, I'm just gonna hit the E key or just go to this eraser here. Now, if it's black and I want to paint white, okay, I can change with the X key. You can see how I'm changing. I'm just hitting the X key on the keyboard. I can paint white, okay? So now I can change my brushes with the brackets. Right bracket is larger, left bracket is smaller. And this is the size of your brush. And I'm in the eraser tool. Okay. So, and this, you can also do it by right clicking on your mouse. That's how I got here. And the hardness I have set at 0 and the size at 70 pixels. Okay, so if I just paint around, I just use the shortcut, these brackets, because I can use I'm right-handed, so I use my left hand to do the brackets. Okay, so I'll just paint a little bit here. Let's go up. So not too bad, but as you can see, that's still maybe a tiny bit red. And I can change that. All right, so here's my mask. That's what I just painted right now. All right, so then I can go back into here and let's go into the red channel again. And that is pretty close to what it should be. Maybe change the green a little bit. Okay, so with curves, as you know, the mid part halfway through, let's just leave it there and I'll up here at the top, these are the highlights. Down here at the bottom are the shadows, and here in the middle are the midtones. Okay, so since this blend mode is in color, I'm only changing the color. So I can come in and I can change the color 2 different ways. So that looks, I think I just messed that up. Yeah, that's somewhere in there. Magenta. I think it was better before. And then you can just fine tune this. That is maybe better. So and you can always just change this stuff any way you like. That's pretty accurate. Say you messed up, you're like, I don't like anything I just did. Just hit this button right here. This is your reset button. Okay, and it's just going to reset like that, and then you can go into each channel and do that again, right? So then just right. So this is how you can whiten some teeth. So I'll just go back to that layer. I think the red maybe is a little off if I want to be exact. Okay. And you can also come in and change some things. I know it's probably not as good as what I did before. I think that's a little more accurate. And that's what I did right now. So, but if you see one tooth is a little more yellow, let's say you want it like this. Now you can take the lasso key or I'll just draw and just change that one. You can see how that one is a little different and you can just adjust that one. So create a new curve, go down to color again, and you can adjust that one. So maybe let's start with blue and okay. Something like that maybe is a little better. So I got rid of a tiny bit of yellow in that one. That looks better. And there are other ways that you can do things, just so you know. There are saturations that you could change, but in this sense, to whiten some teeth, you can do it that way. Also, if you hold the shift key, click on one layer, hold the shift key, click on the other one, then you can select them both. Come down here to a grouping. You can push that button for the folder and get a grouping of those. And if you want to reduce the opacity of those, then that's how you do it there. Any questions on that? Let's move on to our next one. All right, some color. I changed a few of these things here. All right, and now you can see how the baby's hands and the face are different tones, right? So maybe you have a red hand, and this is obviously a newborn, so you're gonna have that different color skin sometimes. And how can you even out that skin? These are my adjustments that I made here, and I'll walk you through kind of what I did and how to do it. Okay, so that's a vignette. I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so this particular one, this is, okay, so I have a group here at 90%, and then I added this tone of color. Okay, so let's just recreate this. I'm just going to turn that off. All right, so same kind of thing is what I was doing before. First, you know, just draw like a little section. This is with the lasso. Now, whether you have a lasso or a marquee, this is the M tool. Now, whether you have, you know, something like this, or if you used the lasso and you did something like that. Now, if you want to add to the selection, you can hold the shift key, just go in and out of that to add it. If you don't go in and out, you're just going to add something apart. And if you want to subtract from that, then hold the Alt key on a PC or Option on a Mac. So I'm holding Alt or Option, and that's subtracting from the selection. If you want just a completely new area, you can just draw. And I'm going to hold the Shift, and then I can just select some of this. And I'll repaint it and erase it, but at least that's kind of the colors that I want to adjust. All right, so I'm gonna pick a tone from the baby here. Okay, so again, go to the semicircle, go to solid color. Then you see what solid color does. Solid color just lays a flat color down, and you can take this color picker, so it brings up this window, this color picker, and you can pick on the anywhere you want to change, right? You can click on this little bunny or the cheeks or the nose or whatever, right? Now, it doesn't really matter right now because we're going to change it into color. Okay, so I went from blend mode normal to color. Okay, so it doesn't look terrible. This was what it was before, and this is what it was after. Okay, just side note here, this little eye, this little icon, that's turn off the layer, turn on the layer. Okay, if you double click on this area right here, which is the properties, which is where we were for curves, then it'll bring up this color picker window. Okay, and then you can just repick your color. And as before, when it was a solid color, you couldn't really see how it blended. But once you put it in the correct blend mode, how you're planning on using it, then you can strategically pick a different color. And maybe that's where you want it, let's say, right? And so, and if you work with hex codes, and if you want to note maybe a certain hex code and you shot a whole bunch of this baby, maybe you want to apply the same tone to the next photo or to the next one or to, you know, 10 photos down the road. You can just type in this hex code, do the same exact thing. Just come here to solid color, create a solid color, put it into color mode. And then whether you have a selection selected or not, it might help to have a selection and then have a small little area like this. So you can just strategically not have the whole entire image a solid color, and I'll explain that. If I went to solid color, and that's what it's going to do if I didn't have my selection. So you can paint this black, and I'll just use the shortcut Alt backspace, that's fill with foreground color. And then Control backspace is fill with background color. Okay, so and the background and foreground color, that's these two down here. Okay, and you can change these by clicking on them. But masks work as kind of a dodge and burn old school photography technique, is black masks out and white makes it shine through, right? It's the dodging and burning, right? So, okay, so if you didn't create this selection like we have here, right? If you didn't do that, it's just going to paint this whole entire thing white. And until you paint it black, this is Alt backspace. Until you paint it black, you won't see the image. Right, and until you put this into color mode, then you won't see the real tone. Okay, so let's just turn that off. Now we can use our eraser. So let's just get into our eraser here. And then since we have that color, now we can just erase, and I'm erasing on here, right? And you can see that little part that I'm erasing, right? And I could sit here and I could erase all this. I could paint the whole entire baby's face if I want to. Maybe you want to accentuate some areas, or maybe bring some areas. So that's just going to flatten everything. Okay, so brackets, make the brush smaller, hit the X key to remove that, to erase from the mask, right? So I'm repainting, I'm just hitting, you can see how this, I can repaint, I can paint, right? So maybe you don't want those lips, right? So I'm just painting, maybe you don't want the eyelashes, and maybe here you want it like that. Okay, so, but you're like, I kind of like it, but it's a little too much. All right, so then just reduce the opacity here and blend it in. Right, and maybe you need another one to recreate that. So that's at 69%. I'm in color mode. There's the before, there's the after. And you're like, well, this hand still needs some more work on it. Okay, so what you can do, a quick little shortcut, duplicate that, Control J or Command J. Duplicate that, paint the layer black, fill with foreground color, right? And that was Alt backspace to fill completely black. Now what I can do is in the eraser, make the brush a little bigger. Then I can paint this hand. I think I'm painting, yeah. So I painted that hand. Now I can change the hand color to maybe fit that, okay? So let's cancel out of that, be on the mask. Now, and then just erase some there. Make that a little smaller. And then that is pretty much painting with a color to blend it in. So this can work for so many applications. Okay. And if you want to reduce all of those, you can select both of them holding the Shift or Command or Control key and click on the folder. It'll paint it, and then you can reduce the entire group, and maybe the sweet spot is less opacity, a little more natural, but not as exaggerated as what it was in real life, right? Because digital cameras show everything, and maybe you just want something in between. So that would possibly be an in between, okay? And that's pretty much what I did in this one here. I think or maybe that one was off. Yeah, this one was off. That's what I did before, and this is what I did today. So that is using the solid color. That is solid color, and then using those in the blend mode color. Okay. Now the vignette. Any questions before I go further? Okay, so you can see how the vignette is a little darker around the edges, okay? And then this is the mask holding the backslash key, and this is the curve that I did. And I'm in luminosity mode, so let's just recreate that. Okay, so say there's our image. Now with the M key, it's in the like rectangle or square, and you can just right click on it, you'll get an elliptical. The shortcut is holding the shift and pressing the M. You can see how that tool is changing from rectangle to circle. Okay, that's just holding shift and clicking the M key. So I want a circle. If you hold the shift key, you can get a perfect circle while drawing it. If you let go of the shift key, you'll be more in the shape of an oval. If before you lifted, I'm using a Wacom, or if you lifted your mouse and you let go, if before you did that, you could hold the space bar and move your selection around. When you let go of the space bar, where you started from will be locked into place, and then you can just keep dragging. And if you hold the shift key, it'll be that perfect circle. So hold shift key, hold space bar. I'm going to move the whole entire thing, right? So I'm holding shift and space bar, I'm moving the whole thing. So I want it right around there, let's say. Okay. Now I'm going to select the inverse. Shortcut is Control Shift I, and that's going to select everything else except the baby because I want a vignette. I want a darker area around it. Okay, so I can right click and I'm going to feather this to be 250 pixels. That's the max. Okay, and that's pretty much what this is here, right? And that's what that's going to look like here. Okay, so before I'm on that, now I want to select group 2 because I keep my curves above other adjustments. Okay, and that's important, and I'll show you why in a sec. Okay, now I'm going to come down here to the semicircle, click on curves, put this into luminosity because I just want to change the light. Now I can just darken the background or everything else outside of my initial selection because I selected the inverse. So it just brings a little more importance to your subject. Let's just delete these. So that's the before and after, and that's the feathering. Feathering is the amount of pixels that the smoothness of that mask, and you can see that there. You can also hold the Alt key on a PC or Option and click on the mask to see it in black and white. And that is the feathering there, okay? So just know holding the Control key, you're actually going to get a selection with the amount of feathering. Holding the Alt or Option key, you get the black and white. And then pressing the backslash key, you'll get the mask in red. Okay, so that is Vignette. Any questions so far? This photo has a little bit of Moire in this area right here, okay? So how I fixed it was like this, pretty easy fix, okay? And kind of the same thing as we did with the baby's hands is a color, solid color, and then picked here on this, on one of the blue tones, selected a mask, and I'll recreate that here. There's also in Adobe Camera Raw, you can do that. I'll show you that in a sec, but here we go. Okay, so we'll click on the background layer. Every time you want a layer on a new layer, whether you create a new layer by clicking this next to the trash, which is the plus sign, that's new layer. Wherever you are in this hierarchy of layers, wherever you are, and you add a new layer, it's going to be on top of that one. Okay, so if we want this on top of our background layer. Then we'll click background layer, we'll click solid color, and let's just hit OK and then blacken the mask. Let's click on the mask, and then you see over here, if I painted white with Alt backspace, it's going to fill with foreground color. I want fill with background color, which is Control or Command backspace. Okay, so now I can see where I need to fix. Okay, so this is a pretty easy fix right here. Okay, so I can, with the X key, I'm going to erase right here. Now, why it's white is because this color is white, right? Now, I want it to be blue. Let's say that blue, but I don't want it like that. I want it to be in color. Okay, so, but it's the wrong color. So let's get the proper color. That's better. That's better. Better, better, better. And maybe something that's pretty close. That's maybe too purple. So depending on your photo, that's pretty close right there. Okay, so as you can see, as I'm picking around, and again, if you have more shots, you can copy that hex code. If maybe you had Moire on other, lapels or other areas of his suit and other photos, you can copy this hex code and maybe your color balance remain the same. Remember how we talked about color in the last webinar? A lot of times, well, sometimes, and I've had it happen before, shooting the same exact, I was shooting a blue sweater on a girl, and I changed lenses in between, and one was an L series Canon lens and one was not an L series. I think it was just a macro lens, and the blue was different. So if you change lenses during the shoot, your color might shift and the hex code isn't really valid, but you'll get pretty close. Or you can just click around and get a good tone. Okay, so once we have that selected, you can just come in here and erase using this. Remember, the X key switches foreground to background, and the opposite is going to work on the mask so you can erase. Okay, so that is one way to get rid of Moire, and you can see it did a pretty good job, right? So that's one way, right? That is, and if you wanted to paint the whole, suit like this blue, you can just go around and paint that whole thing like so, just like that, right? Your call on that. You're more than welcome to, but this, obviously, you're in shade, so the shadows are going to be a little bluer, or maybe it was a cloudy day, or maybe for whatever reason, there's a different blue over here than there. And if you want to paint that whole entire color, this color, you can certainly do that with the mask, just like we painted the baby's hands to unify everything. And you can paint, and maybe it wasn't even a suit, maybe he had some nice dress slacks, maybe he had a different jacket, and you can unify the jacket and those pants if it wasn't a suit by actually coming in here and painting all that together, and it'll have that exact same blue. See the difference? Now, if I paint over there, you see, so hit the X key, erase it, hit the X key again, paint it, and so on, right? So that's a pretty cool trick. So that's one way of fixing it. The other way to do Moire, I think, let's see, where was, okay, so here's Moire here too, right? So I fixed this in Adobe Camera Raw. It's kind of the same thing as Lightroom. Let's just recreate this. So that's without Moire. This is with Moire. You can kind of see that pattern here. So Moire happens more often when you shoot wide open, right? When you're shooting wide open at like 2.8, you're going to have more of a chance for the sensor pattern to line up with a man-made pattern like a suit. It doesn't happen in nature, but it does happen with the sensor grid and another grid in that we've created, that man has created. Okay, so that's, and you get these like funky patterns, but literally it's just, paint that with a solid color, or come in and to Adobe Camera Raw And we'll do that here. All right, double click on the background to unlock that layer. If you want to see that again, all I did to, so it's locked, you can duplicate it, Command J or Control J, and then undo, or you can double click and unlock that. It asks you to unlock it, you say yes, and it removes the lock. Then if you want to duplicate it, Command or Control J. So let's have a duplicate. This will be the original. Double click, change the name, original. And this is ACR, Adobe Camera Raw. And let's work on this one. Okay, now we're going to go up to Filter and Camera Raw Filter. Shift Control A. Okay, now this will bring up Adobe Camera Raw. So in this, and we can do a whole webinar on just Adobe Camera Raw. This is a little area here for a brush. So I can brush this area. Let's say I'm just gonna, I don't really care about the edges, and you'll see what happens. And I'm just gonna put Moire to the max, and then we'll use a mask and get all this. So Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom work in the opposite way that Photoshop does with the red. Okay, so what's painted red will be the affected area. Okay, in this. Okay, now we're gonna scroll down here until we get to Moire reduction. Okay, Moire reduction, let's just bring that up to 100%. And then we could fix it with a mask. Usually you wanna just slide over until it gets rid of it, but I wanna show you something, and you can see it right here. So there's Moire. Then you're kind of like right about maybe there, you're getting rid of it, but just to be safe, let's just do the whole thing, and I'll show you how to fix that with a mask. Okay, so it got rid of our Moire. This was before and after. Okay, you can still see a little color difference, and that's why I like this color fill actually better, because it'll just unify things a little better than doing this Moire fix. So Lightroom has that Moire fix. If you use the brush, Adobe Camera Raw within Photoshop has that as well. Okay, so here is that, and you can see, since I wasn't careful painting it, you can see how the hand tone, this sort of reddish, skin tone, bled over into the suit. You see that? If I turn it off, that's what it should be, and turn it on, then it kind of bleeds into, right? But I have this Moire all happening here. When I turn it on, that Moire goes away, but I have that hand issue. So I can create a mask with this button here, layer mask. Now it's just going to be white because I didn't say what to mask, but just like we used the eraser before, I can literally come in and with my eraser, hit the E key for eraser, just come over here and erase. So there you go. It's reflected on the mask right there. So white, okay, remember this is your Adobe Camera Raw layer that we got rid of the Moire, but the Moire made the hand color bleed into the suit. If I hold the Shift key or press the Shift key and click on the mask, I can put an X on the layer to then see the entire layer without the mask, if I want to see that, right? So that was before, imagine there was no mask on it, and this is after, right? So once I'm on that in the eraser tool, then bracket right is larger, bracket left is smaller. Come down here and just paint some of that. If I had Moire here, maybe I could fix it with just a camera fill, and I wouldn't be able to fix it this way because then the Moire would have shown up. Okay, so in the areas where that bleeds, and I think this is another area too, you can see this edge, how it's kind of getting some of those greener tones onto the edge. That's because I wasn't careful with the Moire mask when I went to Adobe Camera Raw. But what I can do, since there's no Moire in this area, I can be on the mask, be in the eraser tool, come over here, blacken that area of the mask, and since there's no Moire in this area, it doesn't really matter, right? Or just be a little more careful when you are painting in Adobe Camera Raw to fix that moire. But just be aware of all those issues because the edges are going to bleed into each other, right? And that is also evident here, and there might be some moire that shows up. But, and by the way, this, I'm getting the hand by pressing the space bar. So, and then I can just drag that down. So I'll just go around the edges like that. And my feather, if I right click, my hardness is at 0, right? And the hardness again is just like the feathering. Okay, same thing will be evident here, which the edges are going to bleed into each other. So just clean those up. And that is how you do it with Adobe Camera Raw. And again, I also did this with the color fill. So same thing, just picked a blue, got basically that blue, one of these blues here. And then the color fill, I painted the entire suit to be this tone. So if Adobe Camera Raw didn't get it all, I can hit it with this. And same thing, I'm in color mode. This is a solid color. And then that mask is only the blue of the suit. And then I got rid of moire that way. So there's the before of the moire, okay? And this is Adobe Camera Raw, and there's a little unification there. You can kind of see that. So I prefer a little bit of combination of both, and maybe they both work. And again, if you wanted to possibly reduce the opacity of one or the other, just click on the layer and then drag the opacity either, 20%, 80%, 100%, whatever it is. And if you click on here, you can select all and just type in a number with your keypad on your keyboard. All right, so that is moire fixing. Any questions so far? Okay, moving right along. We got some banding issues here. All right. So what is banding and why does it happen? And you can kind of see these bands over here, right? Banding happens when you push the pixels too far. Wait, I have a question in here. What does painting with the color not obliterate the pattern in the suit? Oh, why doesn't it? All right, let me back up just a sec. Chris has a question here. All right, why doesn't it? Because of the blend mode. Okay, if the blend mode is on normal, that obliterates the texture. Now, 2 ways of fixing moire. Sometimes you can reduce the opacity in normal mode. And you can see how I could get that texture back because I'm reducing the opacity, but maybe you're not going to get all the moire fixed. So if you're in normal mode, this is what it's going to look like. But if you're in color mode, it's only going to affect the color. Does that make sense? Okay. Got it. All right. So, and speaking of that, actually, I did that here in to fix the banding. Okay. So I used this same exact trick actually. So I did a color fill layer. So fill with solid color on the blue. I picked a blue tone here. I picked one of these blues. And I'm in normal mode. And this is that's my mask. That's what I painted. So I didn't paint the clouds, but I'm in normal mode and I reduced the opacity. Okay, so I'm at 84. So this is 100. You can see that'll be solid color. And this is 0, right? So again, you can select that, type in 84, and that's what I picked. But then this one, color fill, I have a different color. Well, this one is actually in normal as well. So that's a different color. I guess I did that for the top. And so I picked a darker blue here. You can see that. And there's the hex code again. And then this blue is over here and there's that hex code. So I've just basically picked around here. And we're lucky with this shot because and when I say lucky, I mean the reflection of the sky is in the water, but since there are ripples on the water, you're not going to get the banding. Okay. So why does banding happen? And this is what I was about to explain in the beginning, is when you push those pixels too far and you're in 8-bit, a lot of banding happens when you went from the raw into 8-bit and then you started retouching in 8-bit. So we went over this in our color class the other day. The bit depth matters because of the amount of shades of red, green, and blue, because it's exponential, right? You're dealing with, I think it was 35 trillion possible colors from, I think, 3,279 shades of red, same in green, same in blue. You times all those together, you get like 34 trillion, as opposed to an 8-bit file, which is 256 per channel, all times each other. So 256 to the third power equals 10, I think, what is it, 16.7 million colors. So you're comparing 16.7 million colors to 34, 35 trillion. It's quite a lot. If you subtract one from the other, you're still at 35 trillion. So you have a whole lot more possible colors in 16-bit. So when you start pushing those pixels, whether it's contrast, saturation, or a combination of the two, when you start doing that and you're only in 8-bit, then you're doing yourself a disservice, and the banding happens when you're in the editing process in 8-bit, because those gradations have a whole lot less shades to play with. When you have a whole lot more, your gradations are going to be smoother and you can push those pixels further, and so you won't get the banding. Okay, so here's the banding, and I fixed it. Okay, so I did a selection for just the sky, and that's what that layer is, so I can just isolate that. And then this layer here is a certain color, one of those colors that was in the sky with less opacity. You can see 84%, and then a darker one with less opacity, 84% as well, but just for the top. And if I hit the backslash key, that's how I did that. And then this one is that. Okay, so how I created this one, let's say I did it with a gradient. Okay, so in this, you can see how, and I can just recreate this. Here's the G is for gradient. Okay, so I do it with the old school. I go into basics and I pick this one. All right, I did that a little fast, so let me back up. All right, so here's the gradient tool. I just click G for that. And then you come up here, you can click, I use the classic gradient. And then I went into basic and I click this one. Okay, you have all these other options, but I'm using this first one. Okay, and now you can just literally click and drag. How long you drag for will depend how much transition you want. So if you just draw a small little line or backwards, that's how it's going to be. Okay, so let's say, and I think I just went maybe something like that. Right, so there's just a hair of gradient there, right? So then that's just super small area. I'm actually not doing that correctly, but that is more or less just a darkening of the sky, because I wanted the original sky to be something like that. I actually messed it up worse, but that's how you do a gradient. Okay, simply just dragging, and where you drag from, and you can here's the backslash, and you can see in the red how that is being affected. Whether you go from black to white, you can see in the mask. Whether you go from black to white or white to black, your call on how you want that. And then you can invert this too, but all right, so let me just get back to how it was in the beginning, because that seemed pretty good. Okay, now when you get rid of banding, sometimes you'll need to add some noise. Okay, and we'll get into noise here in a second. And I'm not sure how well you can see this on your screen, but we have the noise is basically going to have some teeth in it. because the banding happens usually in skies and that kind of thing because of the gradients. So since you have less bit depth, right? So then the best thing to do is to add a little bit of noise into that sky, all right? So you can do two things. You can turn this into a smart filter, and then you can always go back into this to change things, or you can literally just go down here to noise and add noise, okay? So if we converted this to a smart filter, the selected will be okay. All right, so what happened there is I lost my sky mask. Okay, so in order for that not to happen, I'm going to make sure I have this as a path, and I do, and here's my path. Okay, so I would delete this and say delete. Then I would convert this into a smart filter. Say okay. And then I want to add a mask, and then this is my path again. And we went over paths in the last webinar, so I won't touch on that. But if you have your path, then you can simply select that there, and that's exactly what it has before, but here's your smart object. So when you're here and you add noise, then you can actually change some of that. You can change it and you can go back into it and you can adjust it instead of being a destructive process. Okay, so you can kind of see here's some noise. This is just 2. And I'm not sure how well you can see it via the internet, but there's a preview off. So that's how it was before. Preview on, that's how it is here. You can kind of see some noise. So you're going to get rid of banding. Now you can do it with a blur filter on the sky. You can do it like I did it with the, I'm just going to hit okay. You can do it with these color fills, which we've gone over. And you can also do it with the smudge tool. Okay, now the smudge tool is pretty cool, and I'll show you that in a sec. All right, so there's a lot to cover in here, and I'm just going to go quick. So we're going to go straight through for another 25 minutes, but feel free to ask questions along the way if there are any. All right, so here is your noise. Okay, so if you wanted to change that noise, since it's a smart filter, you can just click on to that noise and you can change it. If it wasn't a smart filter, you'd have to hit undo, go back into the filter, and then change it to 4 like I just did. But being a smart filter, it's kind of cool because you can literally come in and change it and go back to 2, and you're like 2 was better. Okay, so having that smart filter like that is a non-destructive way to do that. We can talk about smart filters another time, but this, I'm just going to duplicate this, Control J. I want to talk about the smudge tool here. So smudge tool and blur tool, this is the finger, we call it, or I call it, and my retoucher friends, we call it the finger. The blur tool, you can blur things, and this is the smudge tool. So the smudge tool is kind of cool, and that is basically you just move this around and you can smudge. So if I want to smudge this cloud, let's say you probably don't want to smudge the clouds, you want to smudge the banding, right? So you can come in here and you can fix some of those lines that way. You can also do it with the blur tool, right? You can come in here and your strength is like this, and I have sample all layers. So sample all layers means it's going to affect all layers below. Well, it's going to affect all layers actually, but I have them turned off, these color layers. I have them turned off because the smudge tool doesn't work when the curves are on. Okay, and that is a more in-depth conversation that we can have one-on-one. But When I use the blur tool, I can simply come over here and blur certain areas. I'm at 50% strength. If I move this up to 100, this is my strength of the actual tool. Okay, so I can blur these areas and you can see how it's blurring here. I usually don't use the blur tool. I prefer the smudge tool, right? I prefer much more to have more of a control because I feel that I can just smudge some things and get away with it. So the protocol, how I would get rid of the banding, I would go into the background, duplicate the background, take the smudge tool, probably smudge some areas around here and there. Then I would create a color fill based on where I want that. And this is kind of how I blended on this layer. It's not on, so you can see, you can still see the banding, right? And then I would paint some of this color in the normal mode, reduce the opacity so I can actually cover some of those pixels, but also let some shine through. And what I'm shining through is the already smudged area to get rid of those horizontal lines. And then you can add some noise to the background copy layer, which is the smudged tool, and then you are able to fix it. Okay, so that is fixing banding. It's a whole in-depth conversation. And if you guys have particular images that you want me to work on, or you want to work on together, feel free, please sign up for the one-on-one coaching. I believe it's mckennapro.com/coaching. Any questions so far? All right. Yesterday, I photographed him, and I have these up here. So ISO 400, ISO 3200. So I want to show you a little bit of how to fix some skin, right? So here is the 3200. You can see how noisy his skin looks, and in the hat and that kind of thing. 1/8000th of a second. I'm using natural light, no card, no reflector, nothing. f2.8. Okay. If I bring this image down, I'm just going to use the move tool. This is the V key for the move tool. Now I'm just going to bring this guy. Oops, I want to bring him over here. All right, now he's shot. This one is at 400. So if we ISO 400. Now, if you compare the noise within the skin, you should be able to see a difference. You see the difference of how noisy one image is to the other. So when you photograph anything, the less ISO you have, the better, because you're going to have, it's going to have less noise and it's going to be sharper. But also when you are photographing a person, it's going to make your retouching a whole lot easier if you have a low ISO as compared to this high ISO. Okay, so, and I have other examples here. This is, I believe, at 500 ISO, and so we can compare that to here, right? So you have a lot noisier, a lot more noise in the 3200 image, okay? Now, if I wanted to fix his skin, say I wanted to get rid of the freckles or a freckle or a pimple or something with a noisy image, here's one way to fix it. Now, we're not going to get into frequency separation. We should definitely get into that at a later webinar, but that's a more either one-on-one, or we can actually, we should probably do a webinar on that. And that's a very in-depth process, and there's lots of videos online that explain it, but that almost deserves a webinar unto itself. But this is a fast way to fix something, fix a noisy image, fix skin that is somewhat noisy. Okay, so I shot this with a Canon 5DS and I'm at ISO 3200. Okay, now if I click this button here, this plus, I'm going to add a layer. It's going to be on top of this ISO layer. Okay, now if, for instance, I'm using, I call it the J tool, that's the shortcut. J is for healing brush. I don't know why this is a J, but nevertheless, it's a J. So on your keyboard to get to that tool, hit the J, and I use mainly healing brush. Okay. So, and I have, and this works as well, the brackets. Right bracket makes your brush bigger, left bracket makes it smaller. I have this particular tool set to current and below. Photoshop comes default with current layer. So if I'm current layer and I hit the Option key or Alt and I want to paint, it's not going to do anything. Okay. And I'm sitting here trying to fix anything. Why? Because it's on current layer. And if you're on current layer, you have to be on the layer where there are pixels. Then you can actually heal something. But what happens with when it's on current and below, you can be on a blank layer and then you can take a selection and then you can fix something. But take a close look at when I'm fixing something, I'm picking up the texture of an already really noisy texture, and I'm sort of trying to blend it with that, and it's not going to look so good. Okay, so let's just select all, delete, bring that back so that layer is clear, or if you made a mistake, just delete it, create a new layer and start over. Okay, so current and below, and I have my clone stamp tool also set. This is the S key, clone stamp tool, S on your keyboard. I also have that set current and below. Okay, if it's current layer, it's not going to do anything unless you're on the layer where there are pixels, like this layer that we want to change. So I have it set to current and below and create a blank layer and work that way. And again, brackets to the right, brackets to the left, make it bigger or smaller, or right click on your mouse and make that hardness be more or less and the size smaller or larger, right? So one is cloning, and you're going to clone everything, meaning the texture and the identical to where you picked from. And sometimes that's good if you want to maybe remove something. But what I like to do, honestly, is I'll create something off to the side. I'll create a new layer, and I will just, with the marquee tool over here, let's change this to a rectangle. I'm just going to paint something, and I'm going to fill with a tone from his skin. Okay, so I'm just going to pick, like, say that color, and it really doesn't matter because I'm copying texture. Now fill with that, and on that I can pick the texture of this solid color, and then I'll come down here and then paint on that. Because say I want to remove some of these moles or freckles or whatever. So instead of blending from a noisy image, I'm blending from this solid color, which is super smooth, right? So I can just come over here and blend everything. Now you're like, well, you're getting rid of all the texture and all that kind of thing. Yes, but okay. Now let's just see. I'm just giving you an example. So there's the pretty much blended area. Now I can, if I don't need this rectangle of color anymore, I can just delete that. And I have my smooth skin, but I can reduce the opacity to wherever I want it. If maybe he had a lot of pimples, or maybe I don't want to get rid of all the freckles completely. So that's 50% opacity, smoothed out. You still have texture, but you say now you see the noise, one's noisy, one's not noisy. A couple different ways. You can go to Adobe Camera Raw, add green, or you can go up to filter and add noise. Okay, so two ways, right? So here's 0 opacity. Here's maybe, let's say you want this at 30% opacity. You kind of smooth that out just a hair. Then you can add the noise. Let's leave this at 100 just for now. And then we'll go up here to filter. We're going to add the noise to match the already noisy image that we have. Let's say 6. Okay, now I'm in Gaussian monochromatic. Let's say 7, that's what 7 looks like. This is what 5 looks like. This is what 4 looks like. So maybe let's say 6. Maybe somewhere in there is the sweet spot, right? Something like that. And then you can reduce this opacity to match that noise. So I'm not sure if you can, how well you can see that on your screen, but and I didn't match that correctly, but that is one way, or you can go into Adobe Camera Raw, and that's one way to smooth the skin. Okay. Now, is there another case, or we have a question here, is there another case where you could change the color blend mode? Okay, so another case where you could change the color blend mode, as in, are you referring back to the banding or the solid color, or I'm not sure what you're referring to, Chris? Color blend on this image, I'm not sure. Let me, just before it went out of noise. Okay, so, oh, I see what you mean. You mean, okay, so this is your fix, and then if you wanted to, yeah, you can change the blend mode, but this is, since I was planning on doing something like that, it's only going to work in the way that I'm already planning on using it, because my plan was to reduce the opacity just to blend it a little bit, maybe like around the 30s, and then to add the noise. Okay, so that noise would be something like this, and then maybe 9 is a better noise. That looks a little better than 6 did. Another case where you would change the color blend mode. This is one way that you can fix maybe a color blend mode. You can lasso this area, let's say, and then you can come up to solid color. You can pick a tone of his skin, and then you can reduce the opacity. You're going to flatten things, and then you're going to have to add a curve though. But maybe this is what you're referring to. And so in a sense, yes, you can do it like this, but you're going to get rid of some of that texture. And you never really want to get rid of texture in that way. You can certainly do this depending on the skin, but you are, just know that you're going to get rid of the contrast, and you're going to get rid of some of that texture too. So depending on the opacity, I'm just at 20%, and I selected this color, but I could certainly paint it with, a different color over here, and that will reduce some of the texture. So if they have a lot of pimples and something like that, then sure, you can do that, but just know you're going to get rid of some of that texture in here. That's not really advisable, but you can certainly do something like that. So if that particular area needs work and you want to actually reduce some of that texture, you can do it that way. Just know that maybe what you might have to do on top of that is bring up some of that contrast again. Okay, and then maybe reduce some of that opacity as well. But that'll affect that same area. And obviously I just changed things pretty drastically. But that's one way to get your contrast back and to flatten it and to reduce the texture. If you don't want to change the texture, but maybe the color, change this into color and then increase the opacity there. But as you can see, you're going to change that color pretty drastically. So maybe somewhere in between is better, but you would probably want to reduce some of that. By the way, on the 29th of May at 11 Central, we're having another webinar, which is composition. So you're not going to want to miss that. So let's just talk about one last thing here. Now, when, let's say you have an image and you lost some texture, right? This is one way to recuperate this. Now, what I did here is I kind of recuperated some of that and then brightened it back up. And how I did that, I am going to create a rectangle here, copy from the background, Control J or Command J. I have this area right here only. And then I want to move this up above. So I'm going to take some of this texture around over here. Let me just draw that. I'm going to take some of this texture here and place it there. Okay. So how to do that, and then reduce the opacity. Okay. So let's just do that. So let's just anticipate that's going to be up there somewhere, and I can always change that later. Okay. Let's turn this off. And now let's go grab our selection. So hit the W key for a quick selection. This is our object selection. We're going to go into our quick selection tool, select our subject. It's going to find our subject and define this edge, and that's what we want. Okay. So now, since it found our edge, let's just not worry about being a perfectionist. Found our edge. Right, and that is our subject selected, and we know that the edge of the arm is there. Okay, so we want to add that to the mask. Okay, and that's our defined edge. Now what we're going to do is unlink this, and in the V key up here, right, we can move this darker area to cover some of that whiter area. Okay, now and then we could reduce the opacity and gain some of that texture back. See that texture now appearing? Okay. Now that texture is key because it was blown out before, right? It was totally blown out. Now it's back. Okay, so let's use our selection tool again. I think I have a better selection on that one. And then what I did, well, actually, I can't use either. Let's use this selection. And do I have a path? I do have a path. All right, tell you what, I am going to deselect. Let's deselect that, blacken that. Then I'm going to use my path. Once we had our selection, you can get our path. Use our path. There's our selection. Go back to our layer, and then we can just use the erase tool and paint in a little bit of that texture. Okay. And now you might have to blend it and be a little more strategic as to your placement, but you can kind of see that some of that texture is coming back, right? And then what I did here was basically just brighten it again because you want it white, but you got some of that texture back. This is what it was before, and that's what it is now. So if you want that texture back, you can certainly get that. And I did it better in this one, but that is definitely one way to gain some texture. So it prints. Otherwise, when it's at that border of being totally bright, you're just going to have the white of the paper or the white of the metal, and you're not going to have any of this texture, right? So that's just the before and after. So that's a good way to kind of get some of that back. So that's my curve, and that's my area, and this was my mask that I used in the beginning. I did that better this time, or the time before, actually. So I'm only showing this little area right there, right? And that's the only part of, even though you have the rest of them white, I only have information right there, right? That is my only information there, 66%. So that is just a little bit of how to use opacities, blend modes. So that was a lot, and I kind of went fast. So feel free, please listen to the recording, go through it, find things of interest, sort of take some notes and practice, because the way you learn things in Photoshop is really just putting in the hours. It is quite a deep process and the learning curve is steep, but anytime you guys have any questions whatsoever, please just connect one-on-one. We can set up a time. It's mckennapro.com/coaching and meet for one-on-one sessions. We can go over whatever you want photographically, and happy to help. So I hope this was educational. I hope you guys can take certain parts, and regardless if you know Photoshop or would like a review, then it's always good to go over some things, because so many different retouchers retouch differently. If there are no further questions, then thank you guys for attending once again.
Well, thank you.
Yep. Take care, guys. Have a good one.